What if you could have your webcam go from this to this? Hey, what's up everybody? Dimitri of Cat Gaming here. In today's video, we're going to be going over the difference of using a USB webcam like the C920, comparing it against using a professional camera, in my case a mirrorless A6400 from Sony. I'm also going to kind of show you guys the difference between using the HDMI out from the A6400 into a capture card and comparing it to the webcam-y hack that a lot of people are using, where you use the USB and you do a window capture from the software that you can use on your computer. If you have any questions about today's video, or you just want to talk to me about anything really, I stream from Fridays until Tuesdays on Twitch. Feel free to hop in my chat and say hello. Link in the video description below. And if you find today's video helpful, please consider liking and subscribing. Really helps me with the algorithm, and I'm trying to push out as much content as I can every single Friday on ways to help you guys stream, game, just tech in general. Let's hop right into the video. Alright, so what we're going to do first is we're going to talk about USB webcams. The most common being the Logitech C920 and the Logitech C922. I personally have both. My C920 is actually with a friend who's borrowing it because they wanted to stream a little bit more often and they didn't have one. And right now with the pandemic, a lot of people went out and bought webcams, so most webcams are out of stock everywhere. So I lent that to them. But we're going to go over the C922. I'm going to show you my setup, and we're going to quickly just go over some of the pros and cons. All right, so for the C922, it's a just above average webcam. Not much of a difference over the C920. And the biggest benefit of using a USB webcam is it's just plug and play. Easy to set up. You don't have to do anything special. You don't need anything else. Just the webcam, and most of them you can mount right to your monitor and you're good to go. I personally have set it up on a gooseneck that I bought off Amazon that also came with a gooseneck ring light. This is really good for the colors. It's really good for its low light performance. It's a pretty good low light performance webcam. And I stream like entirely in the dark, but this just made it a little bit easier on the webcam. It caused much fewer white balance corrections, because if my scene and my game changed, the camera would have to constantly readjust for how much light was coming out of my monitor onto my face. With the ring light, it's putting more light on my face than my monitor would, so the white balance didn't have to constantly change, which was really nice. And this whole mount system was super cheap. And now the ring light gets used with my mirrorless camera. The biggest cons of using a webcam is obviously the quality is not super high. You know, it's really good. And I would suggest it for anybody who is just streaming, and especially if they're just starting streaming. But unless your stream focuses on super quality streams, like visually, I don't think you would need more than a webcam for majority of your streaming career. I personally really enjoy improving the quality of my stream, and I spend a lot of time changing my overlays, changing my video settings, changing my camera angle, all that kind of stuff. So that's one of the reasons that I got my new mirrorless camera. The second reason being I'm going to be using it for my YouTube videos, so it's basically going to be like a use all kind of camera. So using a mirrorless or DSLR setup is a really great way to improve the quality of your camera, especially if you're doing a lot of full screen camera situations, like if you do a lot of just chatting, or you like having your camera large in size while you're waiting for a queue, waiting to get into a game, etc. So yeah, the biggest con for using a mirrorless or DSLR camera is going to be the price. The most commonly suggested webcam for streaming, if you're going to go to the mirrorless DSLR, is usually the A6100. You can usually pick it up from anywhere from around 450 to 500 new, and you can pick it up relatively cheap, used, if you can find it. But with what's going on right now, it seems like a lot of people went out and bought cameras, and it seems to be really hard to find stock, and almost impossible to find used right now. When using a mirrorless or DSLR camera as your webcam, you also have to factor in how you're going to capture your video from it. So there's two main ways. Using HDMI out from your camera, so you have to make sure you have a clean HDMI out, or else you'll have all of the display items on the screen, so you don't want that. So that's why a lot of people make sure that the camera has a clean HDMI out on it. You need the HDMI cable. You would need a dummy battery if you stream for long periods of time, because a standard battery probably wouldn't last very long, not long enough for a stream. And then you would need some kind of capture device on your computer, so an Elgato Cam Link, a regular capture card if you have one that's not being used right now. For example, I have two Elgato 4K60s. I have the original 4K60 and I have the 4K60 MK2. So the 4K60 MK2 is what captures my desktop and my Xbox right now, and the original one is what's capturing my camera. The second way is dependent on your camera and the manufacturer, but Canon, Fujifilm, and Sony cameras all have the ability to have their feed brought over via USB onto the computer and then used as a webcam source depending on those three. So for example, Canon actually just released a software that allows you to use your camera as a webcam. It's still in beta, so it's not the smoothest, and it doesn't pull the greatest quality out of the camera, but hopefully as they push this software forward, they'll be able to take more and more out of it, and hopefully in the future this pushes camera manufacturers to start putting USB-C on their cameras, and enabling like a higher data transfer so that you can get the same level of quality through USB as you can through HDMI. So here's a list of all of the Canon cameras that work with the Canon EOS utility software. The most common would probably be the EOS M50, because that's around the same price range as the 6400 that I'm using. The EOS M200 is slightly cheaper, but you get a lot less utility out of it. And a good multi-use camera would be the EOS RP, which is a cheaper version of the EOS R that a lot of YouTubers use as their main recording camera and like dual camera. The RP can be found for a good price sometimes, but it is still an expensive camera. For Fujifilm cameras, they have a new app called Fujifilm X Webcam. Unfortunately, it only works on Windows machines, but it makes a lot of the higher end mirrorless cameras from Fujifilm available to be used as a webcam. A lot of the older models aren't supported, which is unfortunate. So yeah, here is the list for the Fujifilm cameras that support that. And finally, for the Sony cameras, it's a workaround solution. So Sony has a program called Sony Imaging Software, and it allows you to control your camera remotely with your computer via USB, and it gives you a live view. And what a lot of people do is they pull up that live view in the software on another monitor. They then capture that window source, and they use that to be cropped down so that all you can see is the webcam source. And there you go. You have a really cheap, easy solution. All you really needed is the USB that came with your camera and a dummy battery, again, if you're going to be streaming for long periods of time, because it will kill your battery relatively quickly. I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail later when I'm going to show the quality difference between capturing video that way and capturing video through HDMI. One more thing I want to quickly talk about is the difference between a mirrorless and a DSLR. All right, so there are two major differences when using a DSLR versus a mirrorless camera as your webcam. The DSLR is a much larger camera most of the time, and because of its nature of the technology, you can risk burning your sensor from keeping it open for too long. And a lot of the times, most DSLR cameras will actually close the shutter when the sensor has been open for too long to mitigate the possibility of damage happening. A mirrorless camera, however, doesn't run into that issue and can be on as long as possible without the actual entire camera itself overheating, which is what a lot of older mirrorless cameras run into issue doing, especially when recording video. And mirrorless cameras are also much, much, much lighter. My camera is very, very small. With a standard lens on it, it looks like it's a point and shoot camera. And now with mirrorless cameras becoming much more common and much more technologically advanced, the performance gap between mirrorless and DSLR is starting to get a little bit smaller, especially on the lower end, like the sub, $2,000 cameras. More lenses are coming out for mirrorless. Their autofocus is incredible, especially with the Sony. And the reason I went for my 6400 instead of the 5100, for example, is because I'm going to be using my camera for not only as a webcam on my stream, but I'm using it for my YouTube videos, and I plan on taking much more pictures and videos in my personal life. And I figured it was very much a worthy upgrade to have that 4K 30 video feed. Having the mic input for when I'm recording videos, I can use a lav mic, and this is my first purchase of like a high quality camera myself. We used to have a Nikon D40 before, but the lens died on it, and buying a new lens would cost more than the actual body itself, so we never ended up getting a new one. So I plan on using this camera a lot, and that's why I made the jump from the 5100 to the 6400. But if you're planning on just getting a really good camera that can take good quality pictures if you want to use it in your personal life and is a great webcam, I would highly suggest the 5100. And here's a quick setup of the camera, the lights that I use. It's using the same ring light that I use for the webcam. I usually just increase the intensity of the light, and then I also use a secondary light that is on my wall, and I don't point it directly at me because it's pretty bright. I point it at the wall so that the reflecting light bounces back at me, and it's a little softer that way. So now we're going to quickly compare the quality difference between the C920 and my A6400. And I know it's not a very fair battle because one camera can be had for less than $80 and the other camera costs around $1,000. So I just want to show you what the difference between them looks like and why it could be very much worth it for someone to pick up a mirrorless camera with a good lens to be used for their streams or their YouTube videos if they so happen to use those. So the first thing you notice is that my C922 has a much wider field of view, and that's because my A6400 has an 18 to 135 millimeter lens, which is not the widest. A lot of people use anywhere from like a 15 to a 16. A lot of people use the Sigma lens, for example, on the A5100. But I got this kit lens for a very good price with the camera, so that's what I decided to go for, and I get a lot more use out of it having such a large zoom length, 18 to 135, compared to the typical kit lens, which is a 16 to 50. I just figured it was much more worth it, especially for my wide range of use. But what you can also see is that the colors on my A6400 are much more accurate. I'm wearing a green, like a really green shirt. So on my C920, it kind of looks a little teal, whereas on the A6400, it looks green. Also keep in mind that my A6400 is at 4K 30 and my C922 is at 1080p 30. So the resolution is much higher on the A6400. The difference between 4K and 1080p resolution wise is huge, and then once you shrink that down to a 1080p canvas that I use when I'm recording my videos, and then even smaller when I'm streaming and it's just a webcam in my corner, it really crispens up the image quality. So another thing I want to show you is the whole thing I mentioned before with the whole white balancing issue. So right now, my screen to my right here is showing Discord, which is a dark theme right now. But if I go and open up a browser that's white, my face on my webcam almost gets entirely washed out with the C922. Whereas with the A6400, you just see a lot more light on my face. It doesn't wash me out. It automatically adjusts the ISO so that it keeps the same similar image. But it doesn't, wash out like the webcam does. So looking at movement, things do look a lot smoother on the A6400, even though they're at the same frame rate. And I feel like it's just the bitrate over HDMI versus the bitrate over USB is just that much better, and things are just able to look a lot smoother. And another thing I forgot to mention is a very big difference between a mirrorless or DSLR camera and a webcam is the depth of field. So a good camera with a good lens is going to create what's called a bokeh effect behind you. So if you notice on my A6400, the background is a little bit blurred. It's not as in focus as I am, so I stick out a lot more from my background. It also helps that the field of view isn't as wide, so it's more focused on me. But you can see, for example, the ugly curtain behind me on my A6400 is not as in focus as it is on my webcam, where you can see the ugliness pretty crisp. And everything behind me on the C922 is pretty crisp and clear and in focus. Whereas on the A6400, see, now it's moving the focus over to what's behind me. But as soon as I go back into center frame, it focuses on me, and the curtain and my TV kind of both go a little bit out of focus. So it's focusing on me as the subject. So when you make the jump over to a mirrorless or DSLR camera, lighting becomes a lot more important. And the reason for that is ISO. So cameras like this use ISO to change the sensitivity of the sensor to capture more light. The higher the ISO, the more light it's able to capture, and the brighter it can make the image, which is very helpful in low light situations, but higher ISO adds more noise. And one of the reasons that expensive cameras are really expensive, and why people want to buy them, is usually they can go to a higher ISO without adding a lot of extra noise. The more light that you provide the camera while it's capturing, and while it's taking in this image, the lower it can have the ISO and the less noise and the more crisp the image looks. So lighting becomes a lot more important. With this camera, I use the ring light, and I use a light that bounces off the wall over here. So keep that in mind, that if you are used to streaming in a very dark environment like I used to, you're going to want some new light sources, and you don't want it to be your monitor. If it's your monitor, the camera's going to have to adjust its ISO a lot whenever you turn on your monitor, or whenever a scene gets really bright in a game, for example, and that's going to cause a lot of issues. So I would very much recommend that you improve the quality of your lights. I'm looking to improve the quality of my lights still. Hopefully at one point I end up getting some kind of studio light, some kind of key light, to make it so that I can increase the quality of my picture. But the problem is I'm in an unfinished basement, so you know, I'd be increasing the quality while keeping a really ugly backdrop that I've got right now. So I'm, trying to spend my money in ways that I think will improve and not make other things look worse. So as mentioned earlier, when setting up a C922 or any kind of USB webcam, all you need is the webcam. You can mount it to your monitor. You can buy extra things if you want to be able to mount it differently. You can buy a USB extension cable to put it further away from your computer if you'd like. But all you really need to start with that USB webcam is the webcam. To add your webcam, pretty simple. Make sure it's plugged in via USB. And then you're going to go into OBS. You're going to go to Add. You're going to go to Video Capture Device. You're going to make sure that you select the right item. So in my case, it would be the C922. And then I'm going to show you the settings in a second. I already have it added, so I'm just going to open up that properties right now. We're just going to remove that because we don't need it. And hello. So you're going to go into the properties once that pops up when you add the source for the first time. And you're going to set this to whatever your webcam allows you to. So I'm doing 1080p, the highest FPS, which is 30. In the case of the C922, at 1080p it maxes out at 30 frames. At 720p it would be 60 frames per second. Video format any, color space default. Usually I disable this. And yeah, that's basically it. All good to go. And your webcam's done. So, you can see how simple it is to set up a USB webcam. You just plug it in, make sure it turns on, add it to OBS, and you're good to go. With a mirrorless or DSLR camera, you're going to need a few more things than if you're using a webcam. When capturing through HDMI, you're going to need usually an HDMI micro to full HDMI or an HDMI mini to HDMI cable. You're going to want a dummy battery so that your battery doesn't die while you're streaming. What a dummy battery is it's a battery that has a cable connected to it, and it goes into your battery slot, and it acts as if you have a battery in there, but it is connected directly to a power source, either via USB or to a wall outlet. What you're also going to need for using these cameras is you're going to need something to mount it. So I personally bought this relatively inexpensive friction arm off of Amazon. I will leave a link in the video description below for this. And I have that mounted to my monitor arms, which then holds the camera just above my monitor. And as I mentioned before, you're going to want some kind of additional lighting. So I use the gooseneck light, ring light, that is also holding my webcam, as well as a light on my wall. Not the best use. I'm going to leave a few links in the video description below for key lights and actual studio lights that you can use. And some people even use a clamp light from somewhere like Home Depot. You put a light in there, you cover it with some wax paper so that it diffuses the light a little bit and makes it a little less harsh. And there you go, you have like a $30 clamp light that you can use. When setting up your mirrorless or DSLR, if you have the option of 4K, I would suggest that you use 4K. Using 4K and downscaling it to the 1080p or 720p resolution that you use will make for a much sharper image, and it'll allow you to do more things with your camera, like punching in and zooming into certain sections for scenes or for funny effects and so on and so forth, without losing quality. So I personally don't really feel like I need 60 frames per second on my webcam. So doing 4K 30 is how I prefer to do it. And if you can do that as well, I would highly suggest it. And finally, you don't want to do any kind of color correction on OBS for your camera. You want the camera to have the perfect color settings so that all that processing is done before going over via HDMI. And the camera is usually very good at doing so. So I'm using a picture profile on my Sony camera right now, and I personally think it looks really good. Although it adjusts depending on the other colors, especially with my RGB colors behind me there. But I feel like it does a really good job, and I don't need to add any additional filters on OBS, which is great. So when using your USB webcam, a lot of the times, especially if you have a C922, you'll get to choose between doing 30 or 60 FPS at 720p and only 30 FPS at 1080p. And what I would suggest is doing the highest resolution you can, and if that makes you go from 60 to 30 frames per second on your webcam, do it. You don't really benefit from having 60 frames per second on your webcam unless you're doing a lot of fast action movements on your stream. And if your stream isn't at 60 frames per second, you kind of lose out even more. But if you're someone like a DJ or a live music performer on Twitch, or you're doing a lot of exercises, 60 frames per second is very nice because it smooths out that motion, and it makes everything look a little bit better and more like real life. So in that case, I would suggest using 60 frames per second. But if your webcam is just being used to show you while you do other things like play games or talk in a just chatting environment, I would suggest pumping up your resolution as high as you can go. And if that makes you drop down to 30 frames per second, don't sweat it. It won't really affect the quality of your stream. The resolution in that case is more important than the frame rate. But if you're doing a lot of movement and a lot of action and you want to capture that in a proper way, the frame rate is a little bit more important than the resolution. So as I mentioned, on my A6400, I use Picture Profile 1. I have the dial set to movie mode. I have it at 4K 30 frames per second. And I have it on clean HDMI out for obvious reasons. To add your mirrorless or DSLR camera to OBS, you're going to quickly make sure you have it plugged into your computer via HDMI into your capture device, whatever it may be, and make sure you have it turned on. Pretty simple. You're going to go to add, you're going to go to video capture device, and then you're going to make sure that you select the right device for what you have. I already have mine added as a source, so it won't let me add it again. But I will show you it here. And then you go into your properties. Once you're adding it, you make sure that you set up your resolution, your frames per second. So my resolution is 4K, my frames per second is 30. Video format any, color space default, color range default. Buffering, I usually actually disable this. And yeah, I don't use the audio from the webcam at all, so I don't really need to worry about that. And that's it. Pretty simple, pretty easy. So what you're going to want to do now, if you're setting up the Sony Alpha Series camera to be your webcam through USB, as I mentioned before, it's kind of a workaround using the Imaging Edge desktop app. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that these settings are set to control with smartphone is off. And then you're going to want to make sure that the PC connection is set to remote. So I will throw the setting up on the screen here so you know which one it is, but the USB connection has to be set to PC remote. Once you're done that, you're going to launch the Imaging Edge desktop application, and you're going to launch the remote. We're going to go and we're going to see our camera here. If everything's set up correctly, you're going to double click it. And now you have a live feed of your camera. As I mentioned before, things look a little less smooth, a little more jittery. If I move my hands, you can kind of see that things don't look as smooth or as nice as they do going through HDMI. But this is usable and it is workable if you don't have a capture card and you don't have the money to spend on one. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that this is full screen. Then you're going to go into OBS. You're going to go to Add. You're going to go to Display Capture. No, sorry. You're going to go to Window Capture. You're going to do Sony Camera. And you're going to capture this screen. Okay? I would suggest you turn Capture Cursor off. And we're going to do Window Title Must Match because we want it to only pull up this screen. Okay? So first thing first, if it's larger than your screen because your screen resolution is larger than the canvas on your OBS, make sure you just right click it, transform, fit to screen to make it a little easier. And now, if you hold Alt, you can live crop an image. So we're gonna live crop this over. And we're gonna crop down. Crop over a little bit more. Oh. There we go. And now we have our webcam. So I can move that anywhere. I can finish the crop there. Finish the crop. Oh, why is it giving me a little extra there? But there you go. There's a webcam. All right, you can make it large and you're good to go. Now you have a webcam via USB with your Sony Alpha Series camera without having an actual software program meant to be used as a webcam, and you don't need a capture card. So it's really easy. Again, this is still on Picture Profile 1. It is still on the movie mode dial. All the same settings as before, except we're going through USB and not HDMI. But again, the reason I like going through the capture card is the motion and everything is much, much, much smoother, right? Like you can tell here that everything kind of looks kind of funky. And I will actually throw up a clip of the webcam in 4K and I'll be doing the same movement. So this is what it looks like via USB, and here's what the movement looks like. So you can kind of see my fingers kind of get all weird and oddly shaped. And things don't look too smooth. Now let's go look at it via HDMI. So now we're doing that same motion via HDMI, and you can see everything just looks a little bit smoother. And I had the extra capture device, so that's why I'm doing it that way. If I didn't have an extra capture card, I would probably go the USB route for a little bit until I can afford like a cam link or something like that. And that's it. So now you guys get to see my camera upgrade. That will be on my Twitch stream and my YouTube videos from going forward. And I hope you guys like it. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please let me know. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below, or go ahead and join our Discord. We got people who, you know, do all kinds of content, from Twitch streams, from gaming to DJs to art. We got people who just do a whole bunch of different things and have all different types of hobbies. So feel free to hop in there. We'd love to see you. And again, I stream from Fridays to Tuesdays on Twitch. Feel free to hop in my chat, say hello. I'd love to see you there. If you have any questions, I'll try to live answer them for you, as long as I'm not super, you know, into the whatever game I'm playing at the moment. And yeah, if you like the video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me out. And I try to put these videos out every single Friday. I'm also looking to possibly do a 2-minute series where I quickly show you guys how to do very specific things in 2 minutes or less. So if you have any suggestions for videos like that, please leave a comment in the section below, or let me know in the Discord, and I'll see you guys next Friday. I have a special sound I just set up for it. With 70. Oh shit! Hold on.
I don't have enough money for chicken nugget.
Did he do it?
That's amazing.
There's 3 mid, by the way. Dude, he tipped $70 in bits.
Did he?
No.
Yeah. Dude, thank you so much.
Oh, Brian, you should have went the other way.
Yeah, I realized that now.
Last player standing.
Nice job.
Oh, I almost had a such shot.
Good try.
I can't feel my feet.
Thank you so much, Finn. I appreciate that. That's awesome.
We are fighters.
I hope you liked the donations down. I spent like 4 or 5 days just setting up different alerts for different amounts. I think I put up like 20 or 30 alert variations for bits and tips.
Yeah, they shot at me. What do you mean? They see me.
All right, 4 mid.
Take it down. My ult's ready.
Nice job, Brian.